Okay, let's look at Detectives in Togas, Chapter 5. Claudia. Rufus did that, Julius exclaimed. He must have gone off his head, said Publius. If Caius's father sees it, there will be trouble. The boys threw anxious glances at the senator's house. Vinicius took the worship of the gods very seriously and was a great admirer of the emperor. It was common knowledge that he had donated a great deal of money for the building of the temple of Minerva. Is it bad to deface a temple? Flavius asked. Is it bad? Pluvius replied. You can get in real trouble that way. Antonius went up to the temple wall and dabbed his finger at the C of Caius. I wonder where Rufus got the nice red paint, he said with admiration. Mucius pushed him aside and tried wiping off the writing with the hem of his toga. But the paint was already dry. Too bad, he said. This scribble has to be erased. Maybe we can rub it off with a stone, Julius suggested. He looked around, but there were no stones in sight. The ground in front of the temple was kept extremely neat and clean. Let's use our styluses, Antonio said. But it was too late. Two men were walking quickly toward the temple. Flavius instantly snatched up his school equipment and fled. Toga streaming behind him, he ran across the square and hid behind a dense hedge of oleander shrubs at the edge of the woods. The others did not hesitate for long and followed his example. Why did you run? Antonius asked, panting. Those men might think we did it, Flavius replied. Quiet, Mucius whispered sharply. They can hear us. The boys peered through the branches and saw the men disappearing back of the temple. One of them called out, laughing, Take a look at that, Claudius. Somebody has written Caius is a dumbbell on the temple wall. The other man did not seem to see the joke. Scandalous, he growled. An outrageous crime. Nothing to laugh at. Well now, take it easy, the first man could be heard saying. You can see it's a child's handwriting. Some silly kid's prank, that's all. You and I were young once, my dear Claudius. No, protested the man addressed as Claudius. Young or not, I would have known enough not to desecrate a temple. The two men emerged from behind the building and walked toward the stone staircase which led to the narrow alley. They were two elderly citizens in snow-white togas. One of them was a big, tall man. The other was short and spindly. The large man waved his arms in excitement and anger as he talked. Abruptly, he stood still, grasped the short man, thin man, by the toga, and shouted, And I tell you, that isn't just a schoolboy prank. The temple is dedicated to the emperor. This is an act of criminal blasphemy. The boy ought to have both hands cut off. Both hands. And that would be far too mild a punishment. The thin man looked uncomfortable. Yes, you're right, he said, trying to pacify the other. But it's none of our affair. We must get to our shops. We have a great deal to do today. They moved on and started down the steps. First, their legs vanished, and then their hips, and finally, their heads. For a moment, the bald head of the big man glistened in the morning sunlight. Then it, too, disappeared. The boys looked at one another in consternation. Do you hear that? Antonio said. He wants to have Rufus's hands chopped off. I told you it would lead to trouble, Publius said self-importantly. But nobody knows that Rufus did it, Flavius said. No matter, we have to get rid of that writing, Mucius said. He started pushing through the shrubbery, but Antonius held him back, whispering, Somebody else is coming. He pointed toward the home of Senator Vinicius. Adjoining the left wing of the villa was a high garden wall overgrown with wild grapevines. Where wall and house met, there was a tiny door which the boys saw was now slowly opening. A small girl thrust her head out and looked in all directions. Claudia, Mucius said in a surprise. What is she doing? Claudia was Caius's younger sister and well liked by his classmates. She was gay and friendly and not a bit stuck up. The boys used to let her play with them, but recently she had passed her 11th birthday, which spelled the end of her carefree childhood. All at once she had been put under the care of several Greek governesses who trained her and taught her and did not allow her to leave the house unaccompanied. But now Claudia slipped out and made straight across the square to the shrubs where the boys were hiding. "Don't run away. I have something to tell you," she called out as she ran. She pushed aside the branches and faced the boys. "I saw you through the window. Something awful has happened. Where is Rufus?" "Home," Mucius said. "Oh, that's good." Claudia sounded greatly relieved. "He had better keep out of sight. My father knows all about it." She looked hot from her run, and her deep blue eyes were glowing with excitement. Usually, Claudia was elegantly dressed, and her hair was done up with the greatest care. But this morning she had slipped quickly into a plain tunic, and her long brown curls were tied carelessly with a narrow ribbon. She wore house sandals, which probably belonged to her mother, for they were much too large for her. "What does your father know?" Mucius asked sharply, his eyes narrowing. "I'll tell you all about it," Claudia replied, "but I'm afraid of being seen over here. I slipped away from my governesses." "Come on," Mucius said. He took her hand and drew her along deeper into the pine woods. When they reached a pleasant, mossy clearing, he stopped. "Have a seat," he said politely, pointing to a low, flat rock. Claudia sat down and the boys gathered around. "Does your father know that Rufus wrote on the temple wall?" Julius asked. Claudia bobbed her head energetically. Tell us," the boys chorused. Flattered at being the center of attention, Claudia quickly patted her curls into place. "Our slaves discovered the writing when they came back from market this morning," she began. "They told the secretary, who ran to my father right away. My father was at breakfast. He put down his glass of wine, left his bread and cheese, and rushed into the main hall to look out of the window. When he saw the writing, he was furious. 'This is an outrage, desecration of the temple,' he shouted. 'Who did it?' The secretary couldn't say, so my father got angrier still and threatened, 'I will have you put in chains.' The secretary threw himself down at my father's feet, saying, 'Mercy, master, perhaps your son Caius knows who it was. It must have been one of his schoolmates. Oh, I could have killed him for saying that.' 'The secretary is an idiot,' Antonius declared. 'Yes,' Claudia said, 'I never could stand him. My father sent for old Herodotus, Caius' tutor, and ordered him to go to school and fetch Caius.' Old Herodotus turned pale and said, 'Caius did not go to school today, master.' 'Why not?' my father roared at him. Shaking old Herodotus also threw himself down at my father's feet. 'Oh, master, don't punish me,' he pleaded. 'I waked Caius early this morning, but he locked himself in his room and refused to open the door. I knocked several times. Finally, he called out that there isn't any school today and that his teacher has gone on a journey.'" "What a fib," Flavius said. "What did your father do then?" Julius wanted to know. "He himself went to Caius' room and brought Caius back with him. Caius was still wearing his nightshirt and he looked real scared. Father is very strict with him. He led Caius to the window, pointed out the writing on the temple, and asked, 'Who did that?' At first, Caius just gaped, but suddenly he flared up and he said, 'Rufus, the son of Pretonius.'" "Shame, shame," the boys cried out indignantly. "What a traitor," Mucius said, frowning angrily. "We must punish him," Julius said. Folding his arms, Mucius stood pondering for a moment. Then he announced, "We shall exile Caius. He won't be allowed to play with us, and none of us must talk to him." "For me, he does not exist," Antonius declared. "I won't speak to him either," Claudia said, blushing. She was obviously genuinely ashamed of her brother. "And I know he lied. Rufus is as nice as a nice boy. He wouldn't daub red paint on a holy temple. He gave me a beautiful ivory doll for my birthday." "But Rufus did do it," Mucius said. Claudia stared at him, her big eyes rounded in amazement. "Caius insulted Rufus's father," Mucius explained, "and they had a fight. This all happened in school. Rufus wrote, 'Caius is a dumbbell' on a writing tablet yesterday," Julius added, "and hung the tablet on a wall," Flavius said. "So then Xanthippus Threw him out of school, Publius finished the tale. Claudia turned her head from one to the other with growing concern. Threw him out of school, she exclaimed. The boys knew she was very fond of Rufus, and Mucius hastened to reassure her. It isn't so bad. Xantippus forgives him. Claudia's face lit up. That's good, she said. But immediately she looked troubled again. My father's awfully angry, she murmured. I came out here because I thought Rufus was with you. I wanted to warn him. About what? Mucius asked. Well, it was this way, Claudia explained. My father didn't believe Caius. That's why he sent for the 2 policemen who patrol the square at night. He pointed out the writing on the temple wall and asked whether they knew anything about it. They were dumbfounded. We saw nothing of the kind last night, one of them said. How is that? My father asked. There was nothing written on the wall, the policeman replied. We were sitting right by that wall of the temple for quite a while. We always have a little snack at night, just some bread and a few figs and a sip or 2 of wine. It was bright moonlight. We would certainly have seen the writing if it had been there at that time. When was that? My father asked. Shortly before the 5th hour of the night, the policeman said. Did you observe anybody near the temple? My father asked. Nobody at all, sir, the policeman answered. And then we left. He asked whether he should report the defacing of the temple, but my father ordered him to say nothing about it. I'll look into this affair myself, he said. Oh dear, Flavius murmured. That sounds bad, Mucius said with a worried expression. And then what happened? Julius asked. Then the 2 policemen went away, Claudia reported. Perhaps your father intends to punish Rufus himself, Flavius suggested. Claudia shook her head regretfully. No, she said, he has another plan. After the policeman left, he asked Caius, How do you know Rufus did it? And Caius answered, We had a quarrel. That's no proof, my father said. But Caius insisted on it. It was so, Rufus, because it's his handwriting. I know his handwriting, he said. On hearing that, my father said, Aha! That's enough. If it is his handwriting, there can be no doubt that he did it. I shall go personally to the prefect of the city this noon and denounce Rufus for malicious desecration of a temple. The boys were too shocked to speak. The prefect of the city was a man noted for his harsh and extreme sentences. He was a man who did not know the meaning of mercy. Do you think the prefect will do something terrible to Rufus? Claudia asked unhappily. Mucius nodded somberly. He has passed a death sentence on people just for laughing when the emperor and his retinue went by. But Rufus is only a boy, Claudia cried out. The prefect wouldn't have a young boy put to death. Why not? Antonio said. Many children have been put to death. I once saw some being executed. They were 3 boys, no older than we are. They were loaded with heavy chains and thrown into the Tiber. They screamed and struggled in the water, and the soldiers laughed. I raced down to the water, begged to try to save them, but by the time I got there, they had already drowned. Claudia stared aghast at him for a moment. Suddenly she jumped up and sobbed, You are lying! And off she ran, plunging blindly through the shrubbery. Hair streaming behind her, she raced across the square toward the garden wall. Halfway there, she lost both sandals. She stooped quickly and picked them up, but instead of putting them on as she continued running barefoot, she slipped through the open garden door and slammed it shut behind her. My, that she's in a hurry, Publius said. Mucius gave Antonius an angry look. You shouldn't have told her that story, he said. Antonius was hurt. But it's true, he said. Such stories aren't for girls, Publius said. For a while they sat in silence, thinking. The rays of the morning sun streamed through the shrubbery. The sky was blue, birds chirped, and a breeze rustled in the tops of the pines. From the Subura, the low hum of awakening street life rose up to them. Rufus must flee, Mucius said suddenly. Where to? Publius asked. Mucius had thought up a plan. Listen, he whispered excitedly. We'll hide Rufus in our cave. Tonight we'll bring him slave clothes. He'll dress up in those, and then we'll take him down to the river. I know a place where he can swim across without being seen by the guards on the bridge. He will have to travel by night and hide by day until he reaches our country place. I'll give him a letter to Silas, our manager, asking him to take Rufus in as a slave, just pretending he's a slave, of course. Silas will do it. He's a real friend of mine. I always help him with feeding the pigs and milking. The police will never look for Rufus out there in the country, and he can stay away until the whole affair blows over." "A wonderful plan," said Julius admiringly, and the others chimed in with praises of Mucius. But Mucius put an end to this quickly. "Come on," he said. "We must go see Rufus at once." They took a shortcut through the woods to a rocky parapet, up which they clambered to a quiet boulevard. Then they ran along a quiet, shady street until they came to a large, old-fashioned building with tiny window openings. This was General Pretonius's villa. Mucius knocked on the door. It was opened by a white, bearded slave who recognized the boys at once. "How is it you boys are not in school?" he asked with a kindly smile. "We have a few days off," Mucius answered. "Our teacher has injured his leg." The old slave chuckled. "I suppose you're all heartbroken about that, huh?" he said, his eyes twinkling with merriment. "And what brings you here?" "We'd like to see Rufus. We have something important to tell him." The old man said. "I think Rufus isn't feeling well. Leastways, I haven't seen him yet this morning. But you look him up for yourselves. You know where his room is. Come on." "Not feeling well?" Mucius asked uneasily. The old slave shrugged. "Just a guess. At any rate, he did not feel like going to school today, or he would have been up long ago." They stepped into the vestibule, took off their sandals, and went on into the dimly lit, modestly furnished central hall. They knew their way around the house, for Rufus's mother, Livia, was hospitable and encouraged the boys to come visiting. The boys liked her very much. Rufus's room was small, dark, and windowless, lighted only by a transom over the door. Lifting the doorway curtain aside, the boys stepped in. Rufus, who was lying in bed, sat up in alarm. "What's the matter?" he asked in confusion. He drew up the blanket, for he was wearing no nightshirt. Oddly, his hair was soaking wet, as though he had just ducked his head into a tub of water. "What's up? Why are you looking so queer?" he asked his schoolmates. "You must run away," Mucius said. Rufus paled. "Run away? Why? Well, what for?" he stammered. "Come now, you know," Pluvius said in a rather sour tone. "I don't know anything," Rufus murmured weakly. Antonio stepped toward him and whispered, "Your life is in danger because of what you wrote on the temple wall." Rufus shook his head in sheer bewilderment. "I wrote something on the temple wall? Are you all off your heads? What was it? What temple wall?" "Never mind lying," Julius said severely. "You wrote Caius is a dumbbell on the wall of the temple of Minerva. Didn't you realize that temple is dedicated to the emperor?" Rufus looked around at his friends in utter perplexity. Suddenly he began grinning. "You're just here to play a trick on me. I won't bite." "We didn't come here to joke," Mucius said angrily. "This business is much too serious. Hurry up, get dressed, and come along." At this, Rufus lost his temper. "Let me alone," he shouted. "I swear I never wrote anything on any temple wall. It must have been somebody else, and if you don't believe me, that's just too bad." The boys were taken aback. It had not occurred to them that Rufus might not be the culprit after all. "Swear," Mucius demanded. "I swear," Rufus repeated firmly, raising his right hand. Mucius whirled around and fixed the others with suspicious eyes. "What about the rest of you?" he asked threateningly. "It certainly wasn't me," Pluvius said angrily. "I've told Caius often enough to his face that he's a dumbbell. There was no need for me to write it on a wall." "Perhaps one of Vinicius's slaves is responsible," Antonius suggested. "Caius might have played some trick on him, like slipping nettles into his bed." To get even, the slave wrote Caius is a dumbbell on the temple wall. What slave in Rome is crazy enough to desecrate a temple? Julius pointed out. We're the dumbbells, Julius said slowly, squinting rather anxiously at Rufus. Didn't Claudia tell us that Caius recognized Rufus's handwriting at once? That's a lie, Rufus protested. How can it be my handwriting if I didn't do it? Mucius frowned. Bet Caius seemed to think he knows your handwriting very well. Rufus gave a forced laugh. That's a good one. Caius is too dumb to recognize anybody's handwriting. He can hardly read yet. His friends did not laugh at his joke. They looked at him seriously. This put an end to Rufus's humor. He fell silent and began thinking. At last he sighed with relief. I can prove that it is not my handwriting, he said triumphantly. How? Mucius asked. Give me a writing tablet, Rufus said. I'll write Caius is a dumbbell, and then you'll see right away that that scrawl on the temple could not have been written by me. This sounded simple enough, and the others agreed. Rufus took a stylus and tablet and prepared to scratch the words into the wax. But you must write just the way you always do, Julius warns him. And write it as big as you did last night in school, Mucius directed. Rufus nodded. He sat hunched on his bed, tilting his head to one side as he wrote. He kept running the tip of his tongue nervously over his lips. Having completed his sample of handwriting, he handed the wax tablet to Mucius. There, that's how I write it, he said with self-assurance. The other boys crowded behind Mucius and peered at the tablet. Well, Rufus asked uneasily. Why don't you say something? Mucius mumbled, rubbing his nose in embarrassment. It looks just like the writing on the wall of the temple, said Antonius, who had an excellent memory. No, Flavius disagreed. It looks altogether different. To tell the truth, I no longer remember it, Mucius admitted. Neither do I, said Julius. We'll check up on that right away, Antonius said, snatching the tablet from Mucius's hand. I'll run over to the temple and compare the two handwritings. Wait, I'll go with you, Publius said. Otherwise, you'll be telling us crazy stories when you get back. A good idea, Mucius said, but be careful that nobody catches you near the temple, especially with that tablet in your hands. You can depend on that, Antonius said, and sped out the door, followed by Publius. An embarrassed silence fell in the little room. Rufus refused to look at his friends. He sat staring absently down at his toes, which were sticking out from under the blanket. After a while, he asked hesitantly, Haven't any of you been to school today? By the gods, Mucius exclaimed. We almost forgot to tell you. Xantippus has forgiven you. Rufus looked up, scarcely daring to believe what he had heard. He has forgiven me? He murmured. Then he doesn't intend to talk to my mother? No, Julius said. He only wanted to give you a good scare. Rufus sat numbed. If I had only known that, he whispered under his breath. But the others paid no attention. Flavius said, after the vacation, you can come back to school. You see, we're all on vacation, Julius exclaimed, and he launched into the story of the assault on Xantippus. But who could have attacked him, Rufus asked wonderingly, when Julius had finished. That's the mystery, Mucius said, and the funny part of it is that nothing was stolen but a few silly mathematics books and pictures. He then went on to tell Rufus about Claudia and her father's threats. Rufus was shaken when he heard that the senator wanted to report him to the prefect of the city, but I didn't have anything to do with it, he stammered. If you really didn't, we'll go to the senator and tell him so, Julius said consolingly. He felt sorry for Rufus. All the boys liked Rufus. He was a good sport and always full of fun and good ideas for games. They heard Antonius and Publius returning, and even before he reached the door, Antonius called out, The handwriting is just the same. He came running in, wax tablet in hand. I was right. The writing on the wall looks exactly like the writing on this tablet. It's true, Publius seconded. I'll bet a gold piece against a single cesters? Ooh, I'm gonna have to look that up. That Rufus wrote it. They're Roman coins is what they're talking about. On my word of honor, I didn't write it, Rufus cried out in anguish. You must have, Publius said. No, Rufus asserted at the top of his voice. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he said, as though he had found the answer and were frightened by it, my handwriting has been forged. What? How? Mucius demanded. Somebody has copied my handwriting, Rufus announced. That's what forgery means. It's when someone copies your signature. But why? Flavius asked. So that people will think I did it, Rufus replied, staring into space with sadness, resignation, and fright in his eyes. Well, Julius murmured, who do you think could have copied your handwriting? Rufus hesitated for just a moment. Then he said softly, how should I know? We are wasting valuable time, Mucius said angrily. You must run away. We have already planned where to hide you. No, I won't, Rufus declared hotly. If I run away, people will feel certain that I did it. My own father and mother would believe it. At this, Mucius' patience gave out. You're crazy, he accused Rufus. Do you want to have your hands chopped off or be dumped into the Tiber? He instantly regretted these harsh words, for Rufus cried out in despair, you think I'm lying, but I really did not do it. Then he turned toward the wall and drew the blanket up over his ears. The boys could hear his smothered sobbing. Julius tried to soothe him. We don't think you're lying, but it is very hard to copy someone's handwriting. My father once told me that. The forger would have had to study your handwriting for a long time in order to learn how you wrote any letter. Rufus sat up with a jerk. The writing tablet, he cried out. The tablet I hung up on the classroom wall. Chaos is a dumbbell was written on that. The others did not understand what he was getting at. You're talking in riddles, like an oracle, Publius said. An oracle is like a soothsayer, teller of future. Perhaps the person who broke into school wanted to steal that tablet in order to copy my handwriting, Rufus said. But nothing was missing except some books and pictures, Julius pointed out. Rufus looked dismayed, but Antonius began to jump with excitement. Hey, he exploded. The writing tablet was gone. Don't you remember? It was not hanging on the wall this morning. Their faces all brightened. We must go back to school at once, Mucius said. If it was stolen, Rufus is right. That will prove once and for all that his handwriting was forged. How so? Publius asked. How so? How so? Mucius mocked his manner. Because otherwise no burglar would bother to steal a writing tablet. You have something there, Publius admitted. Get dressed quickly and come with us, Mucius told Rufus. But Rufus looked embarrassed. No, I've caught cold, he stammered, and he went into a coughing fit. On the whole, it will be better for him to keep out of sight, Julius said. All right, stay here, Mucius said. We'll be back soon. The boys piled their school things in a corner and set out at once. As soon as they were gone, Rufus peered hastily under his bed. He sighed again with relief and leaned back against his pillow. Xanthippus was surprised when his pupils unexpectedly returned. He was sitting up in bed reading, his right leg wrapped in wet cloths. In the apartment's tiny kitchen, a woman was busying herself with the cooking. Hearing the boys, she peered curiously around the corner of the room and then grinned cheerfully at them. Teacher sick, no school, she chuckled. Poor man, bad pains. Oh. She rolled her eyes to express her sympathy, then returned to her pots and pans. Why have you come back? Xanthippus asked crossly. Mucius asked for Rufus's writing tablet. What tablet? Xanthippus wanted to know. The one that has Chaos has a dumbbell written on it. Xanthippus was instantly suspicious. What do you want with it? He asked. Rufus would like to have it back so that he can erase it, Mucius lied boldly. He's ashamed about it. The boys had decided on the way not to mention the desecration of the temple to their teacher, for fear that it would stir up his anger against Rufus all over again. So he's ashamed, is he, Xanthippus? said with satisfaction. About time. The tablet must be lying in the chest over there. Isn't it hanging in the classroom anymore? Julius asked hypocritically. He only wanted to know what Xanthippus had removed, why Xanthippus had removed it. No, Xanthippus said. I don't care to have such things on exhibit on the walls of my school. I put it away in the chest last night. You boys must have noticed it when you cleaned up. The boys rushed to the chest and went through it from top to bottom, but the writing tablet was not there. It's gone, Mucius reported, inwardly triumphant. Then you boys must have misplaced it, Xanthippus scolded. That's what comes of your careless way of doing things. The boys searched all the shelves and finally went through the entire classroom, but the writing tablet could not be found. Back at Xanthippus's bedside, Mucius made his solemn announcement. The thief who was here last night stole Rufus's writing tablet. A strange thing to steal, said Xanthippus vexedly. That tablet isn't worth a copper. The boys bid Xanthippus goodbye, but as they were on the way out, Mucius noticed something shiny lying under the wardrobe. He stooped and fished it out. Look what I've found, he said. It was a short, wide gold chain with a flat disc of gold at one end, a hook at the other. Apparently, the hook had been forced open and bent upward. Mucius brought the chain to Xanthippus. Is this yours? He asked. No, Xanthippus replied. For a while he regarded the chain thoughtfully. Suddenly he gave a short laugh. But I can tell you to whom it belongs. Who? The boys asked excitedly, half guessing the answer. It belongs to the burglar, Xanthippus said. All right, we read 5 and 6 today. So, what will happen? Stay tuned.